right, so let me
Hello.
get started. I know we're still waiting on a few more or a lot more people actually. Let me introduce myself. My name is Lindsay Graves and I am the sales manager here at Premier Listings. And Jordana is going to be giving the presentation today on negotiation mastery. I don't know if you guys have read the book, but How to Negotiate Like an FBI Hostage Negotiator. But it's a wonderful book. I do encourage everybody to pick it up and read through it. Jordana is going to go through a lot of the tactics and strategies that are presented in that book. Let me tell you guys a little bit about Jordana. So Jordana Tobel is the broker owner and Premier Listings. I'm echoing. And she has been in real estate since 2005. And from 2007 to 2015, she oversaw roughly 4,000 REO listings, which is an incredible amount, but we all know what the market was like at that time. So then 2015 hit, and that's when she decided to start Premier Listings. So we're about 6 years old, and we're continuing to grow and thrive. And we feel so lucky that we're able to hold classes like this for all of you guys that are on this call today. So I'm going to go ahead and pass it over to Jordana, and we'll go ahead and get started.
Thank you, Lindsay. Oh, sorry. 1 second, guys.
Technical difficulties.
Okay, cool. Can you guys hear me now? Can I get a thumbs up? Because I can't hear them. Is that right? Okay.
Can hear you.
So thank you for the introduction. That was awesome. One thing I want to point out to you guys, the book is actually called Never Split the Difference. The FBI hostage negotiator that wrote the book, and a lot of the concepts that we're talking about today comes from his theories, and so I'm really excited. I've done a lot of research. I've read a lot of books, done a lot of YouTube videos, and I'm excited to put it all together for you today and try to redesign it specifically so that you as realtors can understand how you can negotiate better. And through better negotiation leads to more transactions and not necessarily more work. So today's agenda, can you guys all see the screen? Can I get a thumbs up? Cool. So today's agenda, I'm going to start with a quick introduction, talk about different negotiation strategies, and then answer 4 questions that as realtors, we often receive from our clients and strategies that we have to answer them. As Lindsay already said, my name is Jordana Tobel. I'm the broker owner of Premier Listings. My personal mission statement is to educate you, inspire you. And when I say you, I'm talking about real estate agents. We're also always looking for agents to join our team. So Lindsay is our sales manager who you just met. I'm Jordana. Feel free to reach out to us directly if you have questions about Premier Listings. So a couple of housekeeping things. Once this course is done, and I have a feeling I might go over an hour. I'm going to try hard to keep it to 1 hour. I might even do a secondary part of this course, depending. But the recording will be up on PLU. PLU is Premier Listings University. It's our free platform. You can register if you haven't already at learn.premierlistings.com. And it's our way of just contributing to the local community and helping real estate agents be the best they can be. If you haven't already, you can also follow my page on Instagram. I try to do tips, strategies, inspiration, things to help you as real estate agents work as smart as you can. So let's jump into it. Let's start with the definition, right? What is negotiation? So negotiation is more or less defined as communication with results. And I want to talk about the 2 functions that negotiations serve, right? The first is you're gathering information, and the second is that you are influencing behavior. Now, that second little segment there is critical, and here's why. As salespeople, right? And there's another great book, by the way, that I recommend. It's called What Great Salespeople Do by Michael Bodsworth. And he actually talks about the fact that most of us as salespeople have the wrong definition of sales. So we think that sales is about solving problems, but in reality, sales is about influencing change. So if you think about that and think about the definition of negotiation, what you are doing is influencing behavior. So negotiation is a critical component of our sales career and who we are as salespeople. And so for you and all of the real estate professionals out there, or anyone that's negotiating, the very first step when it comes to mastering negotiation is get over your aversion to it, right? If you think you don't like it, you're probably wrong. You probably just don't understand it, because we're negotiating constantly. Every day, there are between 7 to 10 negotiations just in your regular day, right? So if you have an aversion, I want you to get over it. And the way that you do that is by understanding it, which is part of what today's class is about. So let's talk about strategies. Strategy number 1 is establishing credibility. And by the way, when I talk about these 4 strategies, I'm also going to ask for you guys to participate. So I want you guys to type your answer in the chat. When you guys list homes, so as listing agents, should you call your seller if you have nothing new to report? Let's see, where's my chat? Okay, so I've got some answers here. Everyone's saying yes. Awesome. And you guys are right. The answer is absolutely yes. So let's talk about that for a second. Before I even talk about that answer, I want to talk a little bit about how you establish credibility, right? So I don't want you going in there. And when I say going in there, I'm specifically talking about, let's say, a listing appointment, right? And instead of showing up and trying to tell them about you and trying to show off, I want you to address their needs. I'm going to give you an example that Chris Voss uses in the book, right? So as an FBI hostage negotiator, right? Probably one of the most difficult negotiations you can imagine. So he tells this story, he tells a couple stories, right? So first he tells the story of a hostage negotiation situation, and he goes to the Philippines to assist. And he goes into this room, and pretty much the entire Filipino government is in this room, right? Everyone except the president's assistant was there. And they looked at Chris and they said to him, well, Chris, how are you going to help us? So Chris starts to list all of the ways that he has been successful. He lists his resume, his position with the FBI. He talks about the fact that he wrote the book on negotiation, literally wrote the book, right? And after about speaking for 10 minutes and listing all of his accolades, he looks up and there's nothing, right? Dullness. He lost the entire crowd. And then he talks about another situation. So there's a kidnapping in Haiti, and an American boy was kidnapped. And Chris is the lead FBI negotiator in this kidnapping. And so imagine, so the father of the kidnapped child calls Chris. And he says to Chris, you're in Washington, D.C. How are you going to help me? So let's think about that for a second. What would you say, right? If you were in Chris's shoes, right? How do you establish credibility, right? Does he say, I've done this before? So like for you, do you say I've listed homes before, right? What does he do? Does he talk about how good he is at negotiation? Do you talk about how good you are at listing homes? Or let me tell you what he said. He said to the father of the kidnapped child, he said, Haitian kidnappers don't kill the people they kidnap, because the people they kidnap are the tools for them. Yes, they kill each other. Now, today's Thursday. I know that Haitian kidnappers like to party on Saturday nights. If you do everything I say, when I say it, I will have your child back by Friday evening or Saturday morning, the latest. And do you know what that father said in response? He said, tell me what to do and when to do it. So that's a really great example of how in this negotiation tactic, he addressed the need, right? This man's need was to have his son back. And then he provided credibility. What was the credibility, right? What was the insight? The insight is that this gentleman he's speaking to is in Haiti, right? And he knows that they like to party on Saturday nights. So that little tidbit, just that small sentence, immediately established credibility. It was insightful and it was credible. So how can you use that when you're talking to a seller? Well, what if you say to your seller, again, rather than going in there, and for those of you on this call who haven't listed hundreds of homes, right? You can't go in there and tell them about the hundreds of homes that you listed. But what you can go in there and do is you can address their need head on and say, if I put this on the market tonight, I will have a buyer for you next week. And you say it just like that with conviction, and I promise you they will sign. Now, in addition to the credibility component, you've also got to have insight, right? It pays to have data. In the book, Chris also talks about the fact, actually another book that I read, I love reading if you can't tell, there's a book by this gentleman named Andy Grove. He was actually one of the early investors in Google. He wrote a book, he used to be the CEO of Intel. And he talks about when he was at Intel, that the newest engineers he would hire were always better positioned than the people that had been in the industry for 20 years. Why? Because those people that were newer had more credibility, right? So credibility is a big component of your interaction with your buyers and sellers, especially in today's market, when all of us know how critical it is to get sellers to trust us. Another critical component of building credibility is predictability. If you want to be trusted with someone that you don't know, what's the best way to do that? Become predictable. So let me talk about this Haitian negotiation situation. So imagine you're talking to, how terrible to talk to somebody whose child was kidnapped, right? So what does Chris do, right? What he does is he says to this parent, I'm going to call you in 1 hour. And what does that do? That prevents that person. Chris is in DC, remember, and his father is in Haiti. So that prevents this parent from doing anything crazy, from going and getting his friends and trying to save the child himself, because you created predictability. So that this goes back to answer the question I asked a minute ago. Do you call your sellers if you have nothing new to report? The answer is absolutely yes. You call them every week, even if you're calling just to say there have been no new showings. So when you create a pattern of predictability, you are building your credibility. And that is how you're going to be able to get more people, and you're going to win more negotiations when you're credible. Strategy number 2, extract and observe as much information as possible. So what do you guys think is more important in a negotiation? Asking questions or listening to the answers? I don't see any answers yet. That's right. So the answer is listening. There's no question. So let's talk about that for a second. Understand, the more you learn, the bigger your advantage. And believe it or not, one of the reasons, if you guys have ever, I've noticed this, right? Some really, really smart people often aren't very good negotiators because they don't think they have anything new to discover. They're so busy talking and telling you that their way is the right way that they're not listening. Or they might approach the negotiation so preoccupied with their own argument that they can't even hear what the other options are. So have you ever worked with, let's assume you're working with a buyer and you're speaking to a listing agent, and that listing agent is so set on their own way that they're not willing to listen to you. And you might have another option for them, but they've already predetermined where they are, right? So this is what I want you to do when that happens. Instead of getting overwhelmed, I want you to make it your sole focus to understand what the other party is trying to tell you. That is true active listening. And the way that you do that is you identify what they actually need and you get them to feel safe about it. Why? Because I promise you, if you make that person feel safe and respected, they are going to start to talk. And when they start to talk, they're going to give you information that you're going to be able to use in your negotiation to better negotiate your deal. So by you being an active listener, making them feel respected, making them feel safe, validating their emotions, you are creating trust and safety. And that's where the real conversation begins. Part of what Chris talks a lot about in his book is that negotiation is just as much about accelerating the results as it is about putting a deal together. And this is what I mean by that. What I mean by that is you want to know quickly if you're going to be able to get both parties to agree, right? Whether it's buyer and seller or you and the seller, right? So accelerate that process so that you can move on. Because not every client is necessarily going to be, or not every deal is going to necessarily be possible. And the deal that's possible is the better deal for you. Chris also talks about something called, instead of working with half the people, work with the ELF people. I'm going to mess this up, but what he's trying to say is the ELF people are the easy, lucrative, and fun, versus the half people, which are the hard, annoying, I don't remember. Oh, no, wait, not hard. Half. I don't remember the rest of that acronym, but the idea, what I'm trying to explain to you guys, that in a negotiation, especially as realtors, right, when it comes to the clients that we work with, we can more or less choose it. And in a negotiation strategy, part of your goal is to quickly come to the determination if you're going to be able to make it work or not. And if it doesn't work, you move on, right? Not every negotiation is winnable. And part of your strategy should be to determine that right away. Strategy number 3, collaboration. So, true or false? I feel like my questions were too easy, by the way. You guys are getting them all right. The best mentality in a negotiation is you versus them. Type in your answers, people. False. Thank you, Lissa. Correct. It's false. Well, I think also the collaboration as the strategy gives it away, but I want you guys to replace the word collaboration with the word, I want you to replace the word negotiation with the word collaboration. I want you to think about how can you get the other team on your side. And by having this approach of collaborating, you're not going to get worn out by the negotiation because you're going to be working together. Chris also talks about the fact that people are 31% smarter when they are in a positive frame of mind. How cool is that? So think about that for a second. If you are working with another in a negotiation, right? And you're both coming at it from a super negative, angry state of mind, right? Think about that versus coming at that same negotiation from a positive state of mind. So the more you have this approach of collaborative, positive teamwork, the more likely you are for that negotiation to be successful. He talks about the fact that if you think about cavemen, for example, and you think about, because all of us are pre-wired to be relatively pessimistic, right? So it's an effort, it's work to be positive. So he talks about with cavemen, right? Let's assume there are 2 cavemen, right? Or let's say 3 cavemen, sorry. One of the cavemen walks into a cave and doesn't come out. So the other 2 cavemen are standing in front of the cave. And the optimistic one says, I'm going to go into that cave because I think things are going to be fine because I'm optimistic. So he goes into that cave, and guess what? He gets eaten by a bear. Well, the other gentleman who's pessimistic says, I'm not going into that cave. I'm scared. That pessimistic mentality is actually part of our survival. Now, when it comes to negotiation, you have to make an effort to be positive because the more positive you be, the better you're going to be able to be open and hear and be that active listener that you know you need to be. I'm going to read you guys this quote. This is a quote that you can use when you're sitting across the table during a listing presentation from a seller that maybe is a little bit difficult, right? And then I'm going to explain to you how this quote uses some of the examples and the strategies that I've just mentioned. So you're going to say to the seller, and I don't care how much experience you have or how little you have. You're going to say, right now, Mr. Seller, I know that you're worried. What's the right price for your home? You're worried about getting your home prepared to sell. And I know that you're wondering what happens when sales break down between signing the contract and the closing. You're looking for a professional that understands how to navigate these issues for you with the minimum of stress so that you're not laying awake at night wondering about if your house is going to sell. So in that example, right, this person is providing credibility, right? They're collaborating because they're putting themselves on that team. And nowhere in here do you ever need to talk about your previous successes. You are addressing their needs, which is exactly what the FBI negotiator did in that example of the Haitian kidnapping, right? Strategy number 4, exercising self-control. Who directs the conversation? A, the person talking, or B, the person listening? The answer is, so, oh, interesting. So we've gotten some A's, which is what I kind of expected, because if you think about it, the person doing the talking theoretically is driving the conversation. But the truth is, that's a myth. The person doing the talking is not the one in control. It's the person doing the listening. So let's talk about that. And by the way, if you remember one thing from this class, I want you to remember that the person that holds the power in a negotiation is the person doing the listening. The person talking is the one revealing information, and the person listening is the one directing the conversation, right? So all of us know when you talk to listing agents and you represent a buyer, especially right now in today's market, right? Is it helpful when that listing agent starts to talk and gives you information about their seller? Does that help you present an offer that is going to hopefully get accepted and represent your buyer correctly? I know in my experience, the answer is yes. So the key here is not necessarily about even asking the right questions. It's really about making that person feel safe. It's about listening and being respectful. Let's talk about empathy for a second. Empathy in everyday words is paying attention to another human being, asking them what they're feeling and trying to understand their world. Now, I want to explain that empathy has nothing to do with reality. I don't need you. So I know all of us, including me, I've had buyers and sellers that are extremely irrational with what they think is going to happen is reality. But empathy has nothing to do with it. It only has to do with point of view. Because like I wrote here in the slide, rationality is in the eye of the beholder. And all of us, we're real estate professionals, right? So we all know as real estate professionals that we don't always get rational behavior, right? Like who gets a buyer and says, okay, I'm willing to pay market value? We don't. All of our buyers want to pay under market value. And all of our sellers want to pay over or want to receive over that, right? So instead of expecting rational behavior, instead I want you to expect the pattern of whatever that buyer or seller does. I know I have a buyer that I'm working with right now who, no, it's irrelevant what the actual value of the property is. All he does is he looks at the listing price and he determines his offer based on that price, not based on the value of the home. And so instead of me getting frustrated by that rationale, which there is none, I expect that pattern and I prepare for it. So when I talk to him about a listing that is going to maybe qualifies for his criteria, I can go in there and preventatively explain so that I can get him to see what I see, but I'm going to get him to do it and come up with it on his own. That's going to get him to make that offer that I know is going to get accepted. So in that example, I'm not going to argue. I don't want you to argue. Right. Yesterday, I had an agent call me that has a listing that's overpriced. And the agent's hooting and hollering at me and telling me that he told the seller that this was listed too high. And he knew this was going to happen. And I said, who cares? It doesn't help you. Don't argue with the seller. Instead, be empathetic. And this is a great little phrase. So what I told him to say to that seller is, Mr. Seller, you think I'm not representing you well, and you think I've let you down. And the next part of this phrase that I didn't write down is even more important. What you're going to say next is you're going to say, what do you want to do now? And the answer to that question is going to do what I told you to do earlier, which is you want to expedite the process of understanding if this gentleman is going to actually list that home at a price that's realistic or not, right? In this example, you're giving the seller the power, right? You're addressing the need, right? You're speaking the truth. There's an elephant in the room, which is that seller thinks that the agent is not representing them, and you are addressing it. Mr. Seller, you think I've let you down. What can we do to solve this? And that will tell you right then and there if that individual is willing to work with you or not. And if not, that's okay. You save yourself that time of continuing to work on a listing that isn't going to sell. Sales is not a job about making rational arguments, right? And this is something that it took me years to understand. So when I first started in real estate, I would make rational explanations to my buyers or sellers about why they had to pay X or accept Y. But when I realized it's really about emotionally framing the situation, all of a sudden it became a lot easier to get my deals done. I knew the emotional drivers and I was able to frame that into a benefit for whatever the party was that I was working with. So if you identify the emotions, right, your chances are infinitely higher of getting that transaction to go through. This is an interesting question. When you are in a negotiation, what is your most powerful tool? So this is one of the harder questions. I want to see you guys, I want to see your responses. So is it your experience, how many homes you've sold? Is it your marketing? Is it data? Right? What is the tool that's going to help you negotiate and get the other person to hear your side? So the answer to this is shocking. Trust, self-control, data, ability to connect. Believe it or not, the most powerful tool when it comes to your negotiation, and this was really shocking for me, it's your voice. You can use your voice intentionally. You can reach into someone's brain and you can flip that emotional switch. So here's what I mean. Assume that you're working with a buyer and the buyer is screaming at you and they're angry about something. I want you to use your voice and I want you to think about how are you going to make that person go from nervous or angry to calm. And similar to what I said earlier about collaboration, right? I want you to be on the same side as them. I don't want you to be aggressive. When you're aggressive, you make the other person push back because they feel like they're being controlled and nobody wants to be controlled. It's human nature. So instead, use a positive voice, be playful, show an easygoing, good-natured personality, even in the face of a tense moment. If your attitude remains light and encouraging, I promise you're going to have better results. You can relax, you can smile. They did this study with women, and they actually used Botox in women to treat depression by forcing them to smile. It is physiologically impossible to feel sad. Try it. I want you guys to smile. Try to feel sad. It doesn't work, right? You feel good when you smile. And so the reason why I'm bringing that up today is because when you are in a negotiation, you can use things that all of us humans, we're all the same race. We all have the same physiological tendencies. And that includes the fact that when you are in a positive, light and encouraging, good-natured conversation, it's more likely that things are going to work, right? So for those of you that come at negotiations and you try to be very aggressive or you try to be forceful, you're not going to have the same results as if you came at it with a voice that is calm, that's positive, and that's playful. All right, try it. Is being right the key to a successful negotiation? Being right is not the key to a successful negotiation. So I want you to stop, right? That agent yesterday, on and on about he was right. He told the seller. I said to him, what does it matter? The only thing that matters right now is your technique and your mindset and moving forward. So you have two choices. You cancel that listing, or you have the right mindset and use strategies to call this seller and use techniques on him to get him to lower his price so that you can actually sell this listing. And the way that you can do that, by the way, we talked about empathy, we talked about point of view. You want to get into the other person's world. Again, it's not about how forceful you are. It's not about the points that you're making. It's not about the house across the street that's sold for X or Y. It's about convincing the other party that your solution is their own idea and the best idea. And don't try to use force on them. Don't try to use logic. Instead, be empathetic. We talked about empathy because it's really not about you. When you understand that, all of your negotiations will change. So what are some ways, some real world ways that you can be empathetic? How can you disagree without being disagreeable? I want you to start thinking about using the words what or how rather than why. So let's say, for example, you are listing a home and the buyer's agent comes to you during the inspection period, right? Rather than asking, well, why is your, they want a credit. So rather than saying, why do they want the credit? Ask, well, how do you want to proceed now? How can I make this better for us? How can we solve this problem that your buyer wants a credit or your buyer wants repairs? My seller is not willing to do that. When you start to ask how questions, people start to think in a way that's solution oriented. You can also use what. You can ask, what are we trying to accomplish? What happened to get us here? These are the ways that you can essentially be confrontational without being confrontational, which I think is the next slide. Oh no, there's a slide in here, I believe, about being confrontational. Sorry, being non-confrontational when you have a confrontation. So those are the 4 strategies. I'm going to continue. I'm going to answer 4 questions that are specific to real estate. I think some questions I've seen in the chat, I'll get to questions at the end if we have time. So let me keep going and start talking specifically about questions that you guys hear and how we can use some of these strategies and tactics to better handle those situations. So first thing is, what sales technique do you think turns people off? So I know here at Premier Listings, we have a lead team, and a lot of the team members are working on leads, right? They're getting 60, 70, 80 leads a month, right? And they're calling those leads. What are the sales techniques that turn those leads off? The technique that turns them off is when you listen only for the yes. Instead, what I want you to do is listen to everything beyond the yes. Remember, we talked about being positive. We talked about being negative. When you're negative, people will clam up. If you ask somebody a question and you get them down this negative path, they're going to stop sharing. Instead, I want you, and the way that you gain instant trust and the way that you sell more, you listen for their emotions instead of trying to force the yes, which I know is contrary to there's a lot of sales techniques out there. They're going for the yes. Chris and a lot of other people experts that I've read about, they say go for the no. Why? Because that no is going to give you information that you can now use to get to whatever it is that you want. So let's assume you're working with a buyer and you hear a hesitation. I want you to listen for that hesitation. I want you to pick up on it. I want you to recognize that fear, and instantly that is going to make that person feel more comfortable. So in this example, you can say to them, Mr. Buyer, I know you said you want to buy, but it sounds like you have some hesitation. It sounds like something is bothering you. Immediately, it's instant trust. They're going to feel way more comfortable. And guess what? They're going to tell you something that you need to know to make that negotiation work. So do not listen for the yes. Listen for everything beyond the yes. Another great question for us realtors, right? What are some tips when it comes to negotiating via email? So the most important tip, less is more. I don't know about you guys, but I've received a lot of emails where people will put all of their moves, right, in the email. So it's kind of like, think about like playing chess, for example. Do you go 7 moves at a time? No. You do 1 move at a time. Make your move and let the other side react. Think about how many of you read long emails? How many of you write long emails? Guilty. So my point being, when it comes to emails, shorter is better. If you do have many things to say via email, I want you to segment it. For those of you in my office, you know, when I write my emails, it's almost always different thoughts are in different paragraphs and they're short. So it makes it really easy, or they're in bullet points. So it's easier on the eye. It's easier for humans to receive information when it's laid out properly, rather than end up being all in one convoluted blurb. Okay, another way that you can negotiate via email, and this is what I was talking about earlier. In order to confront somebody in a non-confrontational way, go back to what I said earlier about using the how question. So I love this example, right? Make your seller come up with the answer. Don't tell them. So you can tell the seller, oh, Mr. Seller, your neighbor across the street, he has a bigger lot. He sold his home for more than what we're listed at, or less than what we're listed at. We need to lower the price. Okay, think about that versus Mr. Seller, the home across the street with a bigger lot, it just sold. How does that home compare to yours? Do you see the difference there? In that example, you just forced that seller to, on his own, figure out that his home is listed too high. How do you have difficult conversations, right? How do you help work with a seller and you need a price reduction? Or maybe you need a repair, or you want your seller to keep your home clean. This is my favorite one out of all the questions. The way that you do that is you do it over time. You cannot expect anyone to do something difficult in one conversation. If you list a home, right, and a couple of weeks pass, and all of a sudden you call that seller and tell them that they need to reduce the price, what are the chances that that seller is going to agree? Versus you call that seller every single week and you tell them, sorry, Mr. Seller, no showings this week. Sorry, Mr. Seller, the feedback, we got 3 different buyers and they all said it was listed too high. And you week after week, over time, the seller is going to start to understand. And guess what? When you call for that difficult conversation to reduce that price, the seller is going to be way more open to it because you prepared them accordingly. It's got to be built up over time. You have to get them to see it the way that you want them to see it, but on their own terms. And how do you do that? Back to my, I think, slide number 3 about being predictable, right? Calling them week after week. It doesn't have to be a one single conversation that's convincing because you've been touching them along the way, right? The accumulation of that process, that's what's going to keep people from going sideways. And you're going to be developing trust. So Chris talked about how one of the best realtors he's ever met, he did a conference in Australia. And what she did was she had a team, and every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday at 10 a.m., they called all of their clients. And that resulted in the most referrals. And why is that? The reason why that happened is because what this realtor was doing was creating predictability. And remember, what does predictability create? It creates credibility. So the people now look at this realtor as the credible real estate professional in their area. And when their neighbors or their friends or their family members need to sell their home, they say, I have a credible source for you. And by the way, it's relatively psychological. They might not even realize how credible they think that their realtor is simply because that person was predictable. So the answer to having difficult conversations is to do it over time. Another great question. How do you stop somebody from ghosting you, right? So what if a buyer, you're in the middle of negotiating and all of a sudden they disappear? Or what about people that you've spoken to? You've had really good conversations, especially my team, right? For those of you guys at Premier Listings, how many leads do we speak to? We have great conversations. You speak to them for hours, and then all of a sudden, you realize they're no longer answering your calls, right? They're not texting you back, right? How do you stop somebody from doing that? So the way that you stop somebody, let's talk about why, right? People stop responding for 2 reasons. They stop responding because there's no progress being made. Nobody will stop a process that is making progress. If week after week, for those of you in my office, if you are sending properties to buyers and none of them fits their needs, they are going to stop answering your calls, your emails, and your texts because you're not making any progress, right? People don't want to waste time, right? People don't want you to waste their time. So if there's no progress being made, they're going to ghost you, or they don't feel listened to. If they're sick of you pitching, every time you call, you pitch, versus every time you call, you have a friendly conversation, you say something funny, right? If they don't feel listened to and you're not paying attention to their actual needs, I promise you they're going to ghost you. So what can you do? This is one of the best strategies. For those of you, I challenge you guys, use this strategy and you will get a response within 3 to 30 minutes. Somebody that you have had a good conversation with and they ghosted you. You can just say this one simple thing. Have you given up on working with me? That's it. Just say that. Because the truth is they think that you don't understand. And the way that you can show them that you understand, you can show them that you understand and address that frustration. So you can say, look, I'm sure you're frustrated with this process. It's not getting you what you want. And you're worried that you can't find the right home. There's stuff bothering you. Let's talk about that. All of us right now have buyers that are frustrated because we know there's not a lot of inventory. And if you are working with a really strong buyer that has a true need and they stop answering your calls, this is what I want you to say. I'm sure you're frustrated. You're not seeing what you want out there, but let's talk about it. And then collaborate. You know, these are some solutions we can do. I have this idea. We can present your offer as cash instead of as financing. There's a lot of different ways that you're going to be able to work with that buyer only if they call you back. So those of you in my office know about something called the assumption technique. I've taught that before. And the assumption technique is essentially when it's the same idea, right? When someone goes to you, you write back, should I assume you're no longer interested? And those of you in my office that have used that strategy, most of us know that works. It's short and sweet, right? And people will usually give you a really concise answer. They will tell you exactly what's going on. They will tell you the truth, right? Did my thing just stop, Bridget?
Yes, it did.
Sorry, can you guys still hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, somebody was calling me. Oh, sorry. Thank you. Okay. So before I open it up for questions, I want you guys, I'd love to know if this was helpful. I spent a lot of time putting this together. Can you guys type a yes in the comments if you learned something from today's class? Yay. Okay. And type a yes. This is something that, again, I usually do these trainings with only agents in my office at Premier Listings. I decided to open it up for everyone. And so if you're not an agent with Premier, is this something that you want to have access to again in the future? Is it something that you want from your own brokerage? We do a lot of classes like this. And so if you are not an agent with Premier, but you are interested in joining Premier, you can visit joinpremierlistings.com. You can email myself or Lindsay. I actually don't think I have the capability of hearing you guys because of the way this is set up. I think I'm going to end.
Can you hear me, Jordana?
I can't hear you. Lindsay, I see you moving, but.
Check the chat.
Can you hear me?
Thank you, Daniela. Great and perfect. How do you negotiate a lowball offer? I mean, it really depends. Oh, sorry. As far as how you negotiate an offer, really, there's no simple answer to that question because it's a combination of all of the concepts that I've talked about, right? It's not just about, I can hear now, thank you. Take this off. Cool. So as far as negotiating a lowball offer, it's really about using all of the strategies, right? It's about listening to their needs. It's about addressing their needs head on. There's no simple answer to that. Thank you for those of you guys that are telling me I did a good job. I appreciate it. What if you are working with someone who does not what they want to do? Someone that doesn't know what they want to do. That's a good question. So there's often a difference, by the way, between what somebody says and what they want. And that's kind of goes back to that slide I did when I talked about looking for things outside the yes. So somebody might say, yes, I want to make an offer on this home, or yes, I want to sell. But then their actions don't support that. The best way to manage that is address that head on. And what I mean is ask them, say, it seems that there's some hesitation. I know you want to sell your home, but is there something else that's bothering you? If you use those tactics, they will open up to you. And when they open up, they're going to give you information that you're going to use, that you're going to be able to address and hopefully solve that problem. So I'm going to end the call. I really appreciate you guys joining today. This recording, if you want to watch it again, it will be on PLU, learn.premierlistings.com. Please give me a follow on Instagram if you enjoyed. If you want to talk to either me or Lindsay about